Hey everyone, how's it going? I hope you're all doing great, as I always say, and following the 3 H's of the channel, happy, healthy, and hydrated. And in this video, it's all about the terrifying Dogman. I have quite a few encounters with you in varying situations, varying descriptions, but if that sounds like something you're interested in, then definitely pull up a stump with me, and let's jump into it. Thank you for watching. So I'm pretty sure that I had an encounter with what people call a dogman just the other day, actually. It didn't really look like one that you normally hear talked about or see like an artist rendition of. It was more brightly colored and not quite as large. I was just standing out on my back patio and it was getting dark out. I heard some rummaging around coming from my neighbor's house. They were supposed to be out of town all week on vacation, so I decided to investigate. I look over the fence, and I see what looks like to be a bright blue colored dogman, and by the sounds it looks like it was attempting to fight with the neighbor's chihuahua and their other dog. The dogman notices me and stands up. It locks eyes with me. It smells terrible. It begins to panic. I can see it in its face, and it runs away on 2 legs. I go back inside my house, petrified by what I had just witnessed. What the hell did I see? This didn't happen to me. It happened to my parents. They were driving back from dropping me off late one night at college. They got into an argument at some point along the way, and were at the stage of just not talking to each other. They had driven through this small rural town, and as they were exiting it, they sped up to about 45 miles per hour. They were surrounded by cornfields by this point. Then, an over 6-foot creature jumps out of the mist on the left side of the road. It lurches across the road on 2 legs, like an injured person would, with its hands held up in the air. My parents continue to approach it. It looks at them. It's the most horrific, scary-looking thing that they've ever seen. It looks like a werewolf monster. It has glinting yellow eyes. There's fangs hanging out of its mouth, and a wolf-like snout. It has nasty, dirty, matted fur all over, and huge claws. It's muscular and ripped. Its chest and arms are very muscular as well. There's a tapered belly, like a dog. It has very muscular thighs, and looks my dad dead in the eyes. He feels great misery and pain, almost sympathy for the beast. It vanishes on the other side of the road before they actually get to it, again into the mist. They drive about another 30 minutes, still not speaking. Finally, he breaks the silence. "Did you see what I saw?" They both agreed. They were afraid to tell anyone except for their sons, me and my brother. None of us knew what a dogman was back then. They claimed basically that they saw a werewolf. Years later, I discovered the Beast of Bray Road, and I tell them that I believe their story. And now that I know what dogmen are, I believe it a lot more than I ever would have back then. So I've had a potentially deadly encounter with a werewolf, a dogman, or some kind of creature of the like. It attacked my chickens. I didn't really see it at first, but I heard the rumble. I thought a fox had attacked them at first, but then when I ran toward it, I saw this huge wolf-like thing disappearing in the bushes. My own dog, who was a huge wolf-like mixed breed, seemed rather small in comparison. Anyway, since I chased that thing away, I locked everything, locked the chicken and the gates, and went to sleep because it was getting dark. And my God, the next morning I found my dog, who, like I said, was a huge black and mean mixed breed, hanging by the fence with its chain around its neck, obviously not alive. This isn't the first time this has happened in these parts. A neighbor from the next farm has 4 huge-ass mean dogs who, quite literally, fight off packs of wolves. One night, 3 of them chased after something in the woods, and later they were also found mangled and dead. What kind of creature can fight 3 huge, mean dogs like this? This happened way back when I was a teenager, riding around with friends one night. We were driving around pretty deep in the woods on these long deserted stretches of back road. We passed this old cemetery. The girl in the back seat says, "Hey, look at that dog." There was an absolutely massive dog-like creature standing behind the tombstones. I slowed down for a better look. It's too big for a dog, though. A wolf? Then the thing stands up, and I think, is that a bear? No, it's not. The thing comes charging toward the road on 2 legs, with its arms outstretched as if it wants to lurch at us. It takes a second or 2 for what's happening to kick in, and suddenly we realize that this thing is closing in on us at an extremely fast pace. I slam on the gas. It takes us nearly a quarter mile for it to give up chasing us. The last thing I can see is the taillights reflecting off of its eyes. The next day, only me and the girl will talk about it. The other 2 just want to push it from their memory. It was that experience that taught me how most people deal with the paranormal. They shut it out, and they repress it. Hwange National Park, Zimbabwe. A father and son were on their way to Bulawayo late at night. The son was driving, and they were traveling from a housing project where the father had just secured a contract to survey the land. Naturally, they were excited for the project, so the 2 men were in extremely high spirits. But suddenly, there was a loud pop, and the car swerved to the side of the road. It was a blown-out tire. Luckily, the father and son were unharmed, and the car wasn't too badly damaged. However, they now found themselves needing to change the tire in the middle of nowhere. They set about changing the tire, their spirits now replaced with a nervous feeling. The place seemed unnaturally silent. They left the headlights on the car to provide a bit of light. They began to notice shadows moving around them and around the car. From the shadows, they heard deep growls. The father kept his cool for his son's sake, but was clearly disturbed. "Just keep working on changing that tire," he said as he frantically attempted to finish. They managed to finish, and the father and son hurried into the car. That's when they saw 4 pairs of golden yellow eyes just at the edge of the darkness. The son hit the accelerator, and the car took off. But to their horror, the eyes started following them, matching their speed. Then, one of the creatures managed to outpace the car, revealing something they could not believe. Although the creature ran on all 4 legs, like a coyote or a wolf, it moved nothing like they'd ever seen. And although its head was that of a wild dog with large fangs, the beast was built like a lean, fit basketball player with well-defined muscles. They realized in that instant that they are being hunted. The son floored it, praying that he could lose the strange creatures. As they passed the one creature which had been running ahead of them, the 2 watched in horror as it suddenly stood up, fluidly, revealing its full height. It was easily 7 feet tall, with hands like claws, and it reached out toward the car, but luckily the car was too fast for it. As soon as they knew that they were somewhat safe, the father broke down and cried from a mixture of relief and shock. Back in the winter of 1961, near Lawton, Oklahoma, I remember waking up during the wee hours of the morning while it was still very dark. I was in my mid-teens, and I still recall the partially open window facing the backyard where we kept a crow in a cage. Nearby, there was a hole in the ground. As I looked out, I saw a strange figure emerging from the hole. It appeared to be very tall and thin and dark, and it had a dog-like head with very pointy ears and a pointed muzzle. I was paralyzed with fear as I watched this thing walk over to the cage, reach right through the chicken wire, and grab the crow. The crow started freaking out, but then with one quick jab, there was silence. The thing then dropped the dead crow back into its cage. I don't recall anything after that, except crawling back into bed and pulling the covers over my head. Once it was light, I ran to the front of our house and awakened my parents, telling them something had killed the crow and I had seen it, but they laughed it off. They started to walk me to the back of our yard where the crow's cage was, to show me that the crow was okay. The crow was obviously quite dead. My dad picked it up, looked confused, and said that it looked like that the crow had froze to death. This is not my story, but my Uncle Nick used to tell us this as kids to scare us. But as I got older and started hearing about the DOGMAN, I started to not think that it was just a story. His story was always the same. He was 17 years old. It was 1983. He was working at a fast food joint in a small town in Ohio. He was working there on the late shift on a summer night. It ended around 11:30 or so, I'm pretty sure. It was much busier than usual, and he ended up getting off an hour later due to how busy it was. And at this time, he was driving home in a beat-up hand-me-down that he, my dad, and my grandpa fixed up. He takes a shortcut through some back road, back to the house he lived at with the family. He slams his foot on the brake when this big deer comes bolting across the road. Only the deer isn't the only thing to appear in the headlights. Out comes this big, hair-covered thing, as he called it, leaping down onto the road. The thing holds up a 5-fingered man-like hand with claws on the end of it, as Nick calls it, up to its face. The creature is built like a quarterback and a pro wrestler combined. Today it would be called an absolute unit. It's about a few seconds long encounter, but he manages to see its face for a fraction of a second. It's definitely wolf-like. He sees the wolf-like face and backs up and just barrels the hell out of there. So fast forward to some time later. I was a kid. My Uncle Nick is now 41. My little sister is 8. It's Halloween. He tells us he saw a real werewolf. Years later, I'm in high school. I look up werewolf sightings out of boredom, and I remember my Uncle Nick's story. I learn about DOGMAN. I tell him what I looked up, tell him similar encounters, and show him pictures. He gets a look of shock on his face and says that that's basically what he saw. He still tells us the story every Halloween. This happened during my first or second year of high school. I live in a smallish city, about 10,000 people, and I have a house that's on the edge of a bordering forest. The house is empty. Me and my mate are trying dumb parkour stuff in front of it. There was a garage with a flat in front of the house, so we practiced climbing on it. It gets dark, but we have enough light from the street lights as the road is right next to us, so we can continue. The road is practically deserted. Think of it as a little detour road that leads from the main road, connects to 3 houses, then back to the main road again. The houses are all next to each other, mine being in the middle. We're basically alone, and there are no sounds in the background. I get tired of wall kicking to get to the top of the garage, and I decide to go back around as it's easier to climb from there. My mate stays in the front. I can hear him talking. As I'm halfway to getting to the back of the garage, I suddenly lock eyes with this gigantic black dog. From his direction, I assumed that it walked up the road and was facing my neighbor's house. After the house comes the forest, like I said. I stop and freeze. My mate is still talking behind me and doesn't have the line of sight either on me or the thing. I'm just frozen into a staring contest with this dog thing. I'm confused as to how did he get there without making a sound, especially since it was absolutely huge. It's all black. The streetlight doesn't penetrate as good in that spot. It doesn't make a sound. It just stands there. All that's separating him and me is this mini fence that it could easily jump over. After what felt like an eternity, the dog just turns its head, stands up, and walks into the forest direction without a sound. I walk fast to my house, dragging my confused mate with me, and I lock the door. My neighbors don't have dogs, as both yards are open. I still remember the terror that I had when I locked eyes with this gigantic beast. My friend is unaware to this day about what happened. And I have another story that's related to this. This is at the same house as the previous one, the edge of town near the forest in that practically deserted area. Every few nights, I would hear an occasional exhale from my front window. And this only started after I had locked eyes with that thing. My bed was right under this window, and this window was on the back of the house, facing the forest. It was always pitch black, and we didn't have any lights in that direction. The first few nights, I believed it was my imagination. I would just roll over and fall back asleep. This always happened deep into the night as well, around 2 to 3 a.m. One night, I wake up around the usual time and I can't fall back asleep. I'm just laying in the bed. I hear that single exhale from my window, literally just a dozen centimeters from me. I shrug it off as imagination, only to hear it again 10 minutes later. I freeze and I listen. I'm now thinking that this has been happening for a few nights, but I've been ignoring it. Imagine a tired dog doing a big exhale, air coming out of its lungs into its nose, and that's exactly what I heard. I suddenly realize that there is a living thing near me, only separated by a single pane of glass. The exhale happens periodically, each 10 to 15 minutes. After about an hour of this, I do fall asleep from exhaustion. I tell my parents the next day, but they don't really think anything of it. This repeated, not each night, but every few nights. Once, I got up and turned the light in the living room on and tried to look out the window, but it was pitch black and I couldn't see anything. I even knocked on the window that time to try and scare away whatever it was. After doing those things, I got back into bed, and you can imagine my terror when I heard it again, this time closer than ever. My terror was more so because I was just looking out the window and knocking on it just moments ago. I was petrified but I didn't hear it again after that last time. I go back to sleep out of exhaustion at some point. This happened at least 2 times per week, and it lasted until we moved to another house a few months later. My encounter took place many years ago. I never had the faintest explanation for it until a couple months ago, when I randomly stumbled across DOGMAN on the internet. I was in my early 20s, working swing shifts at the time and commuting about 100 miles each way, so it was usually around 2 in the morning by the time I got home. I saw the monster, as I called it for the longest time, on the northernmost section of Trunk Road in the Matanuska Valley in Alaska. This area is almost smack in between the towns of Palmer and Wasilla. I was only about 10 miles from home at that point, so it must have been around 2 a.m. Trunk Road now is a narrow 2-lane road consisting of nothing but twists and turns. The surrounding terrain is somewhat swampy and thick with black spruce. It was late October, days before Halloween. There was no snow on the ground, but it was cold enough to be wary of ice. I was driving an '82 Subaru SW, going about 20 miles around a curve, when my headlights caught a large, dark figure up ahead. I'm bad at judging distance, but it was maybe 6 car lengths away. I instinctively let off the gas, coasting closer. Now at first, I assumed it was a moose, as this area is infested with them. But no, it was standing upright. A bear then? No, not a bear. It looked so strange. Tall enough to be an uncommonly large bear, but far too slender. It looked like it had spikes running down its neck and back. A Halloween prop? It was odd, but an effective place for one. All those thoughts ran through my head in the fraction of a second. The car was still coasting closer, and I could see more details. It was standing in profile, gazing across the road. I could clearly see its wolfish muzzle, large upright ears, and the spikes that I had previously thought were that on its back were in fact clumps of fur. Its spine curved in a smooth and very natural looking way. It was standing in the ditch, inches from the pavement. Because I was focused on its upper body, I do not recall anything about its back legs or if it had a tail or anything like that. But I did see its front legs though, very dog-looking, hanging awkwardly down and slightly toward its front, exactly how you'd expect as if a dog stood upright. While it clearly had a canine look, there was something still off about it that I cannot properly articulate. It was perfectly still, and at this point, given the proximity to Halloween, I was quite convinced it was some sort of Halloween prop, because it was clearly not any kind of existing animal. I was deeply impressed, and gently stepped on the brakes, intending to stop by and examine it closely. Then, it turned its head toward me. In the tiny fraction of a second it took for it to swivel its head, I knew that I had made a terrible mistake. The fluidness of its movement removed any and all doubt that it was some kind of prop. It was horribly, terrifyingly alive. The pale, off-white glow of its eyeshine and the headlights destroyed any possibility of a human in a costume. I think I sat there, gaping at it in shock for a few seconds, the car barely moving by now, but still inching closer. As I was almost upon it, I think it could have leaned forward and touched the car if it wanted. I had to look up to see its face. Again, I'm a bad judge of such things, but I'm 5'4", and it was a hell of a lot taller than me. It was tall like a polar bear standing up. 7 feet, 8 feet, I really can't say. I snapped out of my trance and slammed on the gas. The car fishtailed, and I prepared myself for death by monster, as I was certain I'd end up in the ditch. But the tires caught the pavement, and I drove like a complete maniac all the way home. I did not look back. I've only been on that section of road a few times since, never alone, and never in the dark. For the next several years of driving that commute, I went 20 plus miles out of the way to avoid Trunk Road. The thing never made any aggressive moves, but there was something about it that felt very, I don't know, predatory. I never saw anything remotely like it again, and never heard any stories about it in the area besides mine. So, what'd you think of those encounters? Let me know which one was your favorite one down in the comments. And if you haven't already subscribed, then make sure to do so. I post pretty regularly. That, and I'm approaching 20,000 subscribers, so thank you all so much for that. Do you have an encounter of your own? I have an email in the description below that you can send them to if you want to. And if you sent one in and it hasn't been in a video yet, don't worry, it will be in a video. I just like to see where they fit in, if you know what I mean. Also in the description is a PayPal and a Patreon if you would like to donate to the channel that way, but no pressure. And with that, I hope you still follow the 3 H's and stay hydrated and, I don't know, stay moisturized and wash your ass and all that good stuff. And I will see you in the next one. Thank you for pulling up a stump with me. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you later.